In this video, we'll talk about action functions, namely dynamic functions. They can help you if you want to generate some value on the fly during simulation. For example, I want the virtual service to produce the same customer values on output as I received on input. Or I want to receive an increasing sequence of numbers in the transaction ID field. Or maybe I need to generate fresh timestamps or similar use cases. In this situation, the mitigation is to use dynamic functions to copy data from request to response or use value generators to produce an increasing sequence of fresh timestamps or random numbers or whatever you need. We have a couple of built-in dynamic functions that we will demonstrate in this and in the following videos. And for more sophisticated use cases, you can also use scripting. Let me show you on a concrete example. Here, I changed the original values to test the ignore functions that we introduced in the previous video. But you can see when I press send, on input I have these customer details, but on output I have still the same values that I imported. Ideally, I would want these values to be copied here. And this is exactly the next feature that we'll implement inside our portfolio suggestion service. To set up this copy functionality, we will use copy from functions. We could use them here inside our samples from documentation, but to keep things well maintainable and organized, we will create a new rule that will take care just of copying these values. So let's proceed according to the instructions mentioned here. As the first step, we'll create a new rule called copy customer data to response, which will copy the customer element data from request to response. So let me copy this name to clipboard and let's create a new rule. It will be this most usual data rule. And inside this rule, we'll create a new empty row. You can see all the columns are hidden by column filter because by default SV doesn't know which columns are important from the business point of view. So let's display this row in row detail. And let me remind you again that you should see this request response row as a sort of if-then clause. So if these conditions are met, only then these action functions are executed. And in this case, we want this simple request response row to always match so that the customer data can always be copied from request to response. So let me first change the content to portfolio suggestion structure, and now we'll make sure that everything is ignored on the request side, because in that case this request response row will always match. And now on the response side we will set the type to portfolio suggestion, and in the KYC element we'll specify that we'll need to copy the name from the customer name element, the surname from the surname element, the citizenship from the citizenship element, and the city of residence from the city of residence element. Okay, it's simple. You always select the copy from function and you specify the source. If the structures on input and output are the same, then you can even copy it on this higher level. But in this case, there is this additional field, and that's why we can't copy these structures directly on the parent level. We need to copy it field by field. Okay, let's press save, close this. And now, since we set the functions, we'll be able to visualize the columns in this table in a better way by clicking reset to default. So as you can see, we ignore everything on request, so this row will always match. And after matching, these action functions will get executed. This one will set the type of response to portfolio suggestion, and these 4 functions will copy the corresponding names from request. Let me restart simulation and let's have a look how it works in practice. When I keep the data specified here and press send, you can see the name was copied from request as well as surname, citizenship, and city of residence. Now let's proceed with the last step needed to finish this exercise. We'll create a new rule called generate transaction ID sequentially. will find out what's the current maximum transaction ID in the sample data and will make the simulation generate an increasing sequence of transaction IDs higher than this historical maximum. We'll just generate the last 4 digits since the prefix of the ID can remain the same, since we don't expect to run tests with more than some 10,000 iterations. Okay, so let's go to the ESV Designer. And first let's look into samples from documentation rule. And here we'll find out what the transaction ID maximum is. It is likely this field. And that's because this row is topmost. It means it was imported the last, because the fresher the data is, the higher they will be in that particular data rule. So I'll just note this down to my clipboard and I will create a new rule. Generate transaction ID sequentially. Similar to the copy customer data to response rule, we'll just create one empty row here. We'll show this row in row detail. And here again, we want everything ignored on request, since this kind of condition will always match. So these action functions we are going to set here will be executed always. And here we are interested in this transaction ID field. This time we'll not use the copy from function, but rather the sequential number generator function. And see, on the response side, everything else except the type of response, everything else is ignored. And that's because we want to ignore these fields not only from the condition point of view, but also from the action point of view. We don't want to execute any action of any of these fields inside this generate transaction ID sequentially rule. This rule only changes this single field. So keep in mind that in your simulation you can have multiple rules contributing to the result, and some of them can only change 1 or 2 or 4 fields. On the other hand, some of the other rules can provide some default values for everything, or some learned values for everything. If you learn data from the real service, all the fields that you record will get some value. Okay, for our transaction ID, we want to generate a sequence of numbers. That's why we'll use this sequential number generator. In this case, as the value, we specify arguments for this sequential number generator. You can find format of these arguments in SV Help, which is our online help, and I definitely recommend you to search it by full text. I use it daily myself. So in the SV Help, I learned that the first argument here is the starting number, which will be 0 in our case. The increment, the step to increase with each additional call, will be 1. And now we need to specify format. So we'll use this maximum transaction ID that we copied out from the data, and this is how you specify that at the end of this number we need to generate 4 digits with leading zeros. So during simulation it will start with this number, and then the last 4 digits will be generated as 0000. Then after the second request 0001, I'll show you in practice. Okay, when I press enter, SE will validate the value in this field, and now it's not red. It means that I specified the arguments correctly. We can save the rule, close it, restart simulation and test it in our REST agent. Let's press send, scroll down. So currently this is the maximum, and then 4 zeros. We press again, and it's the maximum and 0001. We can do it again and we get 0002. And that's it. That's the last step. In Hands-on 2, we can now try to pass the dashboard. I'll click here. Oh, and I get error. So how comes? The error is that during simulation, the dashboard discovered that this number is not greater than the sample data maximum of this number. Yeah, now I have 7009 and here it's 7. Yeah, and I know why. That's because here we should have increased the number in the prefix to be sure it will be higher than any imported data. And as you can see, dashboard also checks the related other exercises to make sure that when you implement some new features, you don't break the previous features. So the condition functions are still okay, we didn't break it, but the dynamic functions don't work yet. So let's go here and change the argument. Now we need to restart simulation. Click here again. And now both the hands-ons are working correctly.